All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me on this Sunday, depending on where you are, late morning, early afternoon. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. So for those of you that are watching this webinar today, you are one of a select few who I invited to this. Over the past week and a half or so, I've been giving away a core training ebook for runners on Facebook that a lot of people have downloaded. I just wanted to make sure. I always find that those ebooks, again, they're great, some basic information, but this webinar, which is something that I've done in the past, I revamped it, made it specific to the ebook, and wanted to help provide a little bit more information, more background information, so you can implement these exercises and these strategies to impact your running. Sometimes just based on those ebooks alone, they end up again stored away somewhere, saved on the computer, but we don't do anything with them. So I was hoping that the few people that were really interested in understanding this topic more and improving their running would join me today to then hopefully, again, do these things on a regular basis to really see some great results in 2021. So before we get started, do me a favor, silence any technology around you, cell phones, TVs, a lot of little details in the webinar today that I want to make sure you really understand to the fullest extent. Because those will be the things that will create the best and most lasting results. Next, look on your screen somewhere. You should see a Q&A button, depending on how you're looking at watching the webinar today, cell phone, iPad, computer. That Q&A button is going to be the place where you can interact and talk to me directly. So if you have a question specifically, a comment, or some feedback, feel free to drop a line in there, and I will make sure either to answer that question during the webinar or to follow up with you directly if it's something that's a little bit more specific. Next, I will be entering names into the raffle for those of you who are interested in 1 free month in the Healthy Running Program. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. I don't want to get into that just now, but again, a lot of value, running analysis, strength training, core training program, all of that stuff designed specific to you. We'll talk about that more at the very end. I will be sending the replay of this webinar. So if by chance you cannot stay for the entire thing, I completely understand. It will actually be today. I know I say 11 a.m. Eastern time on there. I'm going to send it at 4 o'clock today. I have a window of time after this that I can upload it and get it in an email for you guys to receive today. So make sure you're checking your spam folders, your email, your promotion folders, depending on what kind of email provider you have, because I will be sending that so you can look at that information. I will also be announcing the raffle winner in there as well. So don't miss that. If you were the lucky winner, make sure you get back to me, or I'll be moving on to the next person. All right, so let's get started. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. I'm a licensed athletic trainer and strength conditioning coach in West Bloomfield, Michigan. I work with a lot of runners, mostly throughout the Midwest. Fortunately, with technology now, it's so easy to work with people regardless of location. So I have a really good following here in Southeast Michigan, and then people, again, Chicago, Indiana, throughout Illinois, Northern Michigan, a lot of runners throughout the Midwest that I'm working with currently. I run what's called the Healthy Running Program. This is for runners, again, really regardless of goals. With my background coming from the sports med field and then transitioning into more of a private fitness or strength conditioning setting, I work with runners who are injured, want to improve running form, want to get faster, training for races, or want to learn how to use strength training, core training, movement training, to just allow them to run for years and years to come, right? So regardless of what you're dealing with, if you have any specific questions for me, make sure you ask those. Now, in the webinar today, what I want you to learn, we're going to talk a little bit about the core specifically, anatomy and function of the core. Rather than just saying, here, do these exercises, why are we doing them, right? What are the specific muscles, joints, areas of the body we're trying to target? A lot of times we think about the core in a too simplistic standpoint. It's a lot of different areas that we need to understand, especially from a running standpoint. When we're loading and bounding and landing with 2 to 4 times our body weight, we can't just strengthen our abs and think that's going to make us a better runner, right? We need to understand how the entire core works together to really optimize stability, balance, transferring energy, power, coordinate. I mean, there's a lot of different things that the core can really impact. So we need to understand what those areas are and how to train them properly. And then a few key principles. With a lot of my webinars, I like to talk about principles, not just doing these things to do them, but how do they fit in a system? How do we do them the right way to provide results? We'll talk about a few specific things that you need to think about. And then we'll go into obviously the best exercises. So these are a lot of the things that were shared in the ebook, but we will cover them in greater detail. I will show you some videos. We'll talk through the basics on form and technique and what they impact. So you can hopefully, starting tomorrow morning, you're including those exercises in your routine to become a better and more resilient runner. Now let's start here by covering what is the core. Core, aka the lumbo-pelvic hip complex, right? Just tells you that it's more than one area, right? Lumbo, lumbar or spine, pelvic, pelvis, hip, right? And then I also like to tie into the rib cage as well. So this entire area, right? The trunk, the hip, the pelvis, all of these areas as they really work together as a unit. So we need to make sure, and you see this picture on the left side of your screen, this is what most people commonly think. We think abdominals, obliques. Obliques, great. That's a better understanding than just abdominals. Unfortunately, if we're just completing crunches, sit-ups, those types of movements, we're probably getting stronger in some way, but it's not really going to translate over to better running performance. We need to understand what is the core to then train it effectively. So looking at this picture here, this is the core, right? This is everything. We have all these muscles, again, from around the hips that tie into the hip and the pelvis, hip flexors, glutes, adductors. We have our abdominals, obliques, quadratus lumborum, multifidi, erector spinae. I mean, we have so many muscles that span throughout the body that attach to all of these areas. These are the muscles that we need to train, the muscles in joints. We need to train them to work together. We need to train them to stabilize, to control the spine, the pelvis, and the rib cage to create a good position, because we want good posture and alignment. Because when we're in a good position, then we can absorb force as we bound, and literally bound, right? Running's a plyometric-like activity. So we're bounding one step to the next with 2 to 4 times our body weight coming down on that leg. So from an injury reduction standpoint, because we can't prevent injuries from happening altogether, if we can use the core of this canister to be stable, to improve alignment and posture, we can land and better dissipate force. Most of our injuries happen in that early stage as we strike the ground, just because so much force is coming down onto that leg. So we really need the core to function to stabilize the system so we can land in the right position to be as efficient as possible. The core serves multiple purposes, right? A lot of times we always think about movement. We think, oh, I want to strengthen my abs, either to move a greater resistance or to look good, right? Yeah, that's part of the picture. But the core is there to protect our vital organs, right? We have our spine in the back, we have our rib cage, we have our pelvis. So there's some protection from a bony standpoint, but there's a lot of this open area throughout there. And if we didn't have muscles that were connecting rib cage to spine, rib cage to pelvis, pelvis to rib cage, what have you, we would have this open space that would be very prone to injury. So first and foremost, those muscles are there to protect us in some way in our internal organs. Next up, to breathe. This is one thing that's very easily overlooked when it comes to core training. A lot of people are holding these exercises, completing endless repetitions, holding these planks, doing it and really tensing up and holding their breath. As soon as we start to lose our breath and our ability to breathe, that's when we're no longer seeing that benefit from that exercise, right? We're using a more just brute force strategy rather than teaching the muscles around the spine, rib cage, pelvis, diaphragm to function to stabilize, but also to breathe at the same time. Because stability comes from proper breathing, which helps position our core, rib cage on top of pelvis, but also stabilizing those joints in a proper way. Creating movement. This is something we're not going to talk about a whole lot. I'm going to show you different ways that the core is used to create movement. But we're going to talk about that difference between creating movement and preventing movement, strengthening versus stabilization, because that's a very important distinction I want you to walk away with today. Understanding there's different categories of core training. We're not just going to lump this into one and say, okay, these are just the core exercises. No, this is core strength, this is core stability, and I'm going to show you which one is actually more beneficial for runners based on the demands of the support. And then last one, transfer of energy. So as you run, right, you land on one leg, opposite arm, opposite leg are moving together in a nice coordinated and rhythmic fashion. We're transferring energy throughout the system. So if we're losing stability, position, and alignment of the core, we're unable to transfer and harness that energy. Running is going to be a little bit more effortful, right? We want to be as efficient as possible. The more we need to create energy because we're not stabilizing and positioning ourselves properly, the more we're going to reduce our running economy. We want to be as economical as possible. So that's why training the core in a right way where we can transfer energy, that running becomes this nice cyclical and rhythmic movement pattern. That's when we see really good results with our running. Now, how does the core function while running? So we really need to understand it functions more from a stabilization standpoint than a strengthening standpoint, if you will. If we look at this runner here, what's happening, right? At her pelvis, at her spine, at her rib cage. For the most part, right, the legs are moving forward and backwards, so she's flexing and extending. Pelvis is going to tilt anteriorly, posteriorly to some degree. There's a little bit of trunk rotation as she swings the arms, and that's how we transfer energy, lower body, upper body, and vice versa. But for the most part, compared to, let's say, a baseball pitcher that's going through that bigger rotational range of motion, that core, or that canister, as you'll hear me refer to it throughout the webinar today, is relatively stable. We're trying to maintain its position of the pelvis on the bottom, the spine, and the rib cage over top. We're trying to maintain that position as much as possible, because that's how we transfer energy, and that's how we stabilize the pelvis, the spine, and the rib cage. Right? We want to be in the best position possible. We don't want strong muscles that are strong just moving us and rotating us. We want muscles that are strong in preventing the loss of this position. That's where stabilization comes in. So from an efficiency standpoint, that's something we really need to focus on, is actually preventing movement more so than creating movement. Now, core stability is very neuromuscular. And what that means is we can't just train these muscles in isolation to crunch, to extend. It's not always this conscious thing that's happening, right? As we step off a curb, as we run, the brain, the nervous system are telling these muscles to actually contract before we're striking the ground, in anticipation to and in reaction to movement, right? So it's very neuromuscular. We need to make sure at some point as we train the core, we then put our core stability training in an upright and dynamic movement pattern that translates to running. A lot of times we're doing things that are so conscious. We're thinking about every little thing we do, whether we lunge, okay, I'm going to align that knee this way. When I'm engaging the core, I'm going to flex and engage my abs. As you run, things happen. Things should happen automatically. We need to teach the body and the system how to do that properly. One of my favorite quotes here: you can't fire a cannon from a canoe. So if we look at running specifically, where we're looking to run longer distances, run with better quality, improve power, turn over the legs, running speed and performance, we need to make sure that we are using this core to create a good solid foundation, because that's what everything else moves off of, right? We have this single leg, one leg at a time on the ground. The core has to be stable in the middle so we can use our glutes, use our hip flexors, use our core muscles to stabilize, to create efficient movement. A lot of times I see people who are, again, strong in the core, but don't have that underlying stability, don't have this feed forward and feedback mechanism. When I'm talking about, those muscles are anticipating movement and then reacting to movement. And so what happens is, you see this cannon, right? This cannon being shot from a canoe, what's going to happen? That canoe's not strapped down in any way, right? That canoe is almost like free floating out there in the water, in the ocean. So as you try to push and explode that cannonball out of the cannon, there's going to be no foundation for it to be explosive from. So what I see with a lot of people are training the core ineffectively, and almost this is the end result, right? Building a stronger cannon without reinforcing that canoe. What we need to do in that situation is we need to get that canoe either on the shore, get it to a dock, anchor it down to the ground so it's solid and in place. So then we have a solid foundation to shoot that cannon from. That's where the core comes in. A lot of people are working on getting faster, running longer distances, but they don't have the foundation in place to do so. They're addressing muscles in a way that, again, it's good for that particular muscle, whether we're strengthening the glutes because we're thinking, oh, I want to push off and develop power and run faster. But unless we also address the core in the right way, we're missing that foundation, right? We can't build a house on quicksand. We can't shoot a cannon from a canoe, right? So that's where proper core training comes in. Now, some training principles that are important to just understand as we get into the main content today. First and foremost, specificity. So what specificity means, and we need to look at it from two different lenses. Specificity means your core training program, your strength training program, your running program, doesn't matter. This applies to movement in general, needs to be specific to your needs. A lot of people are doing things just to do things. We're picking stuff in ebooks. We're getting them from magazines or offline because someone's saying this is a good exercise for runners. Instead, what do you need specifically? Where are your weak links? right? Where are you breaking down as you run? What are those issues? How do we address those specifically? I'm not telling you you need to do every single exercise that I'm going to show you today or from the ebook. I'm telling you, you need to understand which ones address your weak links, because those weak links are the areas that tend to cause the issues later on as we run, right? So we need to bring ourselves up to an even level. We're addressing our we have our strengths, we have our weak links, and we're not so far off from one to the other. So knowing how am I going to address my weak links to improve a weakness, an imbalance from one side to the other side, or just poor overall form, to then again be specific to my needs. The other way we need to look at that is from a running standpoint. If we're truly using core training to become a better runner, we need to understand the demands of the sport. So like I talked about a second ago, running is a very stabilization focused sport, right? The core itself, the goal is to transfer energy. Goal is to create that foundation to act like, again, a canoe that's strapped down so that cannon can then fire from it. We need that foundation in place from a stabilization standpoint, rather than just strengthening muscles with exercises like crunches, sit-ups, Supermans, Russian twists. We need other stabilization exercises in there that will then translate over to the demands of running. So being specific to your needs first and foremost, and then being specific to the demands of the sport. Next up, minimum effective dose. Over the last however many years, we've grown to think more is better rather than better is better. So giving yourself what you need, and that's it. A lot of times we don't need to go crazy when it comes to core training. We need to work on the specific exercises that, again, are specific to your needs and the demands of running. Do we need to be doing entire days worth of core training? No, probably not. A lot of times when you incorporate other movements like your split squats, like your step ups, upper body movements as well, we can really tie all these pieces together to get that core training component. So we don't need to do endless exercises, but in reality, can we do 2 to 3 exercises per strength training day very well, rather than devoting entire workouts to specifically the core. Breathing is one of those other things which I mentioned in the beginning is very commonly overlooked when it comes to core training. We need to understand that the diaphragm is its function is to help us breathe, get oxygen in and out of the system, but also it's this deeper core stabilizer. It attaches to the rib cage spine, right? We need to make sure that we're properly breathing as we stabilize. A lot of people are getting into plank exercises, holding it for minute and minute on end, and making it this higher level strategy if they're just holding their breath and kind of bearing down, right? We want to be able to comfortably breathe as we complete the exercise. If I notice someone, we complete a core stability exercise together and I'm watching them, I'm monitoring how well are they setting themselves up? Are they breathing? Are they getting that rib cage down? Are they creating a good position between the rib cage, the spine, and the pelvis? That's the first priority. And then can they continue to breathe in a proper way as they complete that exercise? If I see them stop, lose their breath, I usually take them a step back, train them how to breathe and stabilize properly, and then allow them to move forward. A lot of times they can do the exercise. The exercise looks okay, but unless we're breathing, we need breathing and stabilization to happen simultaneously. Okay, so Katina had a question. How do you learn how to breathe more efficiently to run for longer periods of time? I've no idea how to breathe while running, so I run, then stop. I run, then stop, then run once I catch my breath. Very discouraging. So when it comes to breathing while running, there's so many different ways to do it. I usually train breathing here in a controlled environment first. I find that we're always trying to do things the hardest way possible. We're always trying to think, oh, I have trouble breathing, or I have trouble stabilizing. I'm going to run and think about that. That's the hardest way to do it. We need to learn how to breathe while performing these core exercises first, teaching ourselves how to get into the right position, stabilize, breathe simultaneously, put that into a harder exercise, put that into skipping, put that into hopping, put that into running. There are you can breathe in certain breaths. Every foot strike, every third foot strike, you're going to inhale, exhale. There are a lot of ways you can synchronize your breathing. I usually don't go that far, to be honest with you. I always train it in a controlled environment first. I have people slow down their running, since the majority of people are running too fast. So if you feel like I'm running, I have trouble breathing, and I have to stop, reset, and then go again once I catch my breath, I would really look at, again, your heart rate monitor, see what zone you're in consistently. Majority of your runs should be conversational. So I would look at that to see, are you actually running too fast in the process, which is making breathing challenging? And then at the same point, implement the breathing core stabilization strategies. Those are some things to think about, but I can definitely, and understanding a little bit more about what you're talking about, what you're experiencing, maybe looking at your Garmin or some data, we can definitely individualize that a little bit more for you. Now, when it comes to types of core training, one second. All right, so types of core training. Like I mentioned earlier, we're not just saying do these core exercises and that's everything. We need to break this down. I like to break it down into two specific buckets, if you will. So first and foremost, we have core strengthening. This is what most people are doing. I see people consistently running into problems with their program, having issues, running related injuries, doing a lot of strengthening type movements, whether that's your crunches, your Russian twists, your sit-ups, your Supermans. We need these to some degree. We want a strong core because that will translate, again, it being less resistant to fatigue, more resilient to injury. But we need to really understand stabilization to a greater degree. This is where most people kind of miss the boat, if you will. Core strengthening teaches you to create movement, to move through a range of motion against a given resistance, whether that's your body weight, whether it's a dumbbell, whether it's a cable. There's a lot of different ways we can weight core strengthening exercises. Core stabilization is teaching these muscles, not just these outer muscles, rectus abdominis, lower back, obliques, but some of the deeper muscles along the spine, right? Multifidi, rotators, transverse abdominis, some of these deeper muscles that contract to stabilize and prevent the spine from moving. This is where a lot of the benefit in core training for runners lies, right? We need to work on core stabilization, your dead bug, your powerlift press, your plank variations, and then hip bridges as well, right? Which I like to lump in there from a core stabilization standpoint. So when it comes to core strengthening, like I mentioned, here's just a couple quick examples. So just so we can show that. Russian twist. Yes, we're stabilizing. Again, this is kind of that, it's the gray area a little bit. I'm stabilizing because I'm holding my position, but I'm going through that rotational motion, right? So I usually lump that more into the core strengthening category. Straight leg sit up. I'm using the abdominals, the obliques, these anterior core muscles to move me through the range of motion into that sit up position, right? Rather than using the abdominals to prevent motion, prevent extension, which you'll see in a second ago, or these rotational muscles to prevent rotation, we're using these muscles to move through the range of motion. None of this, again, Russian twist happens to a degree, not to the degree I'm showing in terms of rotation, right? A small amount of rotation side by side, side to side as I incorporate that arm swing motion. Never am I going into a flex position. I still want these to some degree, but I don't want the majority of my program to incorporate core strengthening, okay? Instead, these are using the same exact muscles, some of the deeper stabilizers as well, but these are a way for us to kind of switch the focus from, again, Russian twist, the powerlift press, straight leg sit up to dead bug. We're using those muscles to stabilize the spine rather than to move the spine through the range of motion. Powerlift press is a great exercise. Not many people are doing it. Using a cable column, using a band, sitting in a slight squat position, gauging the core, stabilizing, trying not to move, pressing in front. That resistance is trying to pull me out of position while I'm using those core stabilizers to hold, creating stiffness, creating stability to maintain my position at all times. And now dead bug. Abdominal muscles, obliques, transverse abdominis, deeper spine stabilizers. I'm using these muscles in the front. So as I move my opposite arm and leg, I'm not arching my back into extension. I see a lot of people, again, back issues in particular, other hip, pelvis type running related injuries that cannot stabilize their spine. They cannot control the position. So as they move opposite arm and leg, their back constantly goes into this arch position as it lifts away from the floor. Right? We want to be able to maintain that position. This is the canister I'm talking about, the pelvis, pelvic floor. We have our spine. We have our rib cage, right? We have our diaphragm sitting in that rib cage. We want that to be in a centrated position. This is how you start to train that, right? That creates efficiency of movement from the core and the trunk. Now, I've been saying it multiple times here. Which is more applicable for runners? Core stabilization, right? Just to say that one more time. If there's one thing you get from this today, think stabilization over strength. We need to prioritize stability, but not neglect strength at the same point. It's not all or nothing, right? A lot of times that's the issue with a lot of these programs. We research something and they say, here, this is the best way to do it. We throw out everything else in the process. We still need a blend of things. I still want you to strengthen your core. Again, do your Russian twist, do your straight leg sit-ups, do your Supermans, what have you, but make sure the majority of your program is actually including a stabilization exercise or exercises if you want to get better at running. Now, what I want to do here is launch a quick poll or quiz, if you will, see who's paying attention here. A couple simple questions just based off the content we've covered today. Depending on how you're looking or viewing the webinar today, some of you might see this perfectly. If you're maybe on your phone or somewhere else, you might not see this. So if you don't see it, just disregard it for right now. But question number one, the core is comprised of every muscle and joint that attaches to the spine, pelvis, rib cage, hips, or all the above. 2, the main function of the core while running is to properly position the rib cage, spine, and pelvis, transfer energy throughout the body, create efficient mechanics, all the above. Or 3, stabilization is the most important characteristic to maximize running performance. Is that true or false? Take a second, answer those questions. I got a few of you on here right now. I know a few have signed up for the replay, so I'm going to wait to see, get a couple more of you to answer, and then we'll move on. Awesome. All right, so let's look at this for a second. Share the results. So core is comprised of all of the above: spine, pelvis, rib cage, hips, all the muscles and joints that are in those areas. Main function of the core is all of those things, right? All of the above. Stabilization is the most important characteristic to maximize running. I said that so many times, you're probably sick of it by now, but that is true. I'm gonna have one more little quiz later on, so make sure you guys are paying attention here. Now, if we look at core stabilization now, breaking this down into categories. So we have our core strength, we have our core stabilization, and then in our core stabilization, we have smaller, again, subcategories of core exercises. So I like to break these down into, and these will make perfect sense in a second. Don't get too confused by the terminology and things like that. Anti-extension, anti-lateral flexion, anti-rotation, your bridging exercises, and your loaded carries. This is kind of a well-rounded look at core stabilization training. So once we can add these things into our program, we're making sure, are we pulling from the right buckets, right? Depending on what specifically you need, first and foremost, you might find I have weakness in this area more than that area. Okay, I'm going to prioritize that as much as possible. It doesn't need to be equal, taking one exercise from each category. It might be, this is really where I'm weak, I'm going to focus down on here, but I'm going to sprinkle some of these other things in. Or if you think I just need to do and train the core in a general way, I can pick specific exercises. Now, anti-extension, very simple. Preventing extension, all anti, right? Anti-preventing extension of the spine. So I think if I'm upright right now and I'm extending my shoulders and my head backwards towards my heels, that's extension. If we look at the pelvis, this is a very simple way to look at it. And by no means do I want you to look at this picture and think, hey, I'm not supposed to tilt. We're so, over the years, we've really demonized anterior pelvic tilt. As you run, as you extend and push that hip away, the pelvis, one of those anomalies, has to tip anteriorly, right? That's a normal motion at the pelvis. So we're not trying to prevent that from happening as we run, but we're trying to train our bodies how to prevent extension at the spine, first and foremost. So we're trying to find this neutral pelvis position. With that also being said, don't flatten the back completely on the ground, right? We've another area we've gone too far. We're like, okay, tuck your pelvis under, flatten your back on your floor. The back is naturally in this slightly arched, slightly lordotic position. We want to maintain that arch. We don't want to reverse the curve and flatten the back on the ground. Can we maintain the arch at our lower back and then train ourselves how to stabilize around that? That's natural, right? Not going to the extreme of flattening, okay? So what you see here, this is a common position where I usually use breathing, and we'll continue to ask about the breathing. This is where we start a lot of times with breathing. So a lot of people are in this rib flared position. You can see there, the pelvis is tilted just at rest, and there's this big gap under her spine, right? She's really arched throughout the lower back there. So we would use our breathing, exhale. As you exhale, you allow that rib cage to come down. You're creating a better position between the canister, the pelvis, the spine, and the rib cage. And then you're completing your core exercise. I don't want to train the core in this position. I'm not set up properly, right? I want to exhale, rib cage down, continue to breathe, perform the exercise to the best of my ability, and always resetting every single time with breathing. So we want to stay out of that position as best we can. Back to the dead bug, right? So if we look at the position here, so look at my position versus hers, right? You can see just alignment of the spine. Rib cage, we don't see a very prominent rib cage. I'm not overly open at the ribs or arched at the lower back. I've used breathing and that exhale to allow the rib cage to come down. I'm engaging the core. I'm moving opposite arm and opposite leg in a coordinated way. Again, specific to running, right? Opposites moving at the same time. And I'm just teaching my core how to stabilize myself in that position. It's as simple as it is right there with the anti-extension core stability. We can then take that another step into planks, which I'll show you in a second. I find a lot of people doing planking exercises without this foundation in place. We need to understand how to breathe first, how to stabilize in the ground in the supine position, and then use that and put that into play with planks. Planks have just become this, again, common exercise for everyone to do. And this is the first thing most people go to. Yes, the position might look right, but are you setting up properly? Are you breathing to then execute that plank properly? Now, as we progress in this position there, again, I would get up in position. I would exhale, rib cage down, squeeze the abs, create a good position between the pelvis, the spine, and the rib cage. And I'm just creating tension all the way through. Shoulders pushing away, abs engaged, quads, glutes, tension throughout the entire system to hold as level and as still as possible. You do not need to hold planks for minutes and minutes on end, right? Planks, I would go 60 seconds max, especially from a running standpoint. Running is a sport of gaining and losing stability. We're literally bounding from one leg to the next. We're not just holding a standard and stable position the entire time. I'm trying to gain stability before and as I strike the ground. And then I'm losing stability as that leg moves, and I gain stability as the other foot strikes the ground. So you'd be better off completing higher level core stability exercises, high plank before we reach, plank with shoulder taps, where you're kind of alternating that stimulus of, okay, I'm trying to stabilize as I'm going and moving through different positions. But you can see as I hold here, a little sloppy, to be honest, if you want to critique me on my form on this one. Hips are up a little bit, knees are slightly bent. I could probably do better form on that. So I think good to see there. That's, again, not perfect in any means, and I probably should clean that up. But I'm trying to stabilize the core in the middle as I have a moving limb, whether that's an arm, whether that's a leg. I'm never moving out of that standard position. I'm locked in my plank position, but I'm trying to, again, maintain stability as the extremities move, right? That's running. You'd be better off doing something a little bit more challenging, like a high plank four-way reach, a high plank with a shoulder tap, high plank lifting one leg and the other leg, those little variations of the plank, then holding a standard plank for minutes and minutes on end, okay? A lot of these plank challenges out there now, which are good. They get people moving, they're fun. But once you hit a minute or so, we need to make them a little bit more challenging. Now, anti-lateral flexion. All lateral flexion means is side bending, right? This is a pretty common exercise in the gym, these side bends or whatever you want to call them. I'm not even sure, to be honest with you. I honestly don't do them at all or prescribe them for any of my runners, just because we're never going into that position where we're side bending side to side, right? If you want to strengthen those muscles, great. Is that necessarily going to translate to better running? No. I'm going to show you other exercises here in a second that'll be much better for that. So side planks. This is one of the best exercises for runners, right? We need to get into that side plank position. We need to build the foundation with either a modified side plank from the knee or a full side plank, just to make sure I am using these muscles, obliques, QL on the outside of the core, hips, shoulder, that entire lateral chain or lateral line is firing to hold the body up. because this is what helps really work on stabilization throughout the core, the pelvis, and the hips as well. Because my end goal is to get up to a single leg side plank. This is a modified version. I usually get people from the regular side plank first. We'll go regular side plank. We'll go modified, lateral elbow stabilization, it's called. No long name for it. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to tie together the core and the hips to work together. Running is again, game of stabilization where we want that pelvis to remain level. A lot of people are striking the ground. Their pelvis is dropping a lot side to side. The knee starts to collapse and the foot rolls into pronation. We want to stabilize. A lot of that comes from the core. How well is that core stabilizing the pelvis, right? As the pelvis or the rib cage attaches to the pelvis, if the spine attaches to the pelvis, can I use these muscles on that lateral aspect of the body to strengthen and stabilize? Because I ultimately want to get to a single leg side plank position. Goal on this exercise through the research is we want to be able to hold, just hold. This is lift and lower. This is how I train it with the counting repetitions, going 10 repetitions, 12, 15. We should be able to hold a single leg side plank for 20 seconds per side. That's the minimum we want to achieve. Most people, when we're doing that first initial evaluation, 0 to 5 seconds, when they lift that leg, their body's kind of dropping down on the ground. So being able to have that lateral hip abductor, glute medius, lateral core, oblique, quadratus lumborum, all of these muscles working together, this is what's going to stabilize that pelvis and the hip, right? These are some of the most important areas when it comes to running. So this side plank progression here, went from a side plank, regular side plank, modified to lift and lower the leg, full side plank, lift and lower. This should be one of the biggest things you try to kind of implement in your program moving forward. And this is one that I would say you should be doing multiple times per week. If there's one, just based on what I see where people are struggling, this is the one that I think will create the most value for you moving forward. Now, anti-rotation. So here we're going back to that Russian twist movement. So you can see her in a great position, good angles at the knee, hip, back is flat, engaging the core, but rotating from side to side, right? Usually a lot more rotation than we need to incorporate while running. So we want to teach these muscles not necessarily to rotate through the range of motion. I usually, at some point, depending on the runner, we'll do limited range rotations within the limit of their arm swing and trunk rotation. But more often than not, we're implementing what's called incorporating the Palloff press exercise. Earlier, I showed you the standing variation of the Palloff press. Now this one right here is the tall kneeling position. I usually prefer this in tall kneeling or half kneeling, which means on both knees, tall kneeling, or in a lunge position on the ground, which is half kneeling, because I can drive the hips forward. I can exhale, get the rib cage down, so I can create this nice aligned position between the knees, the hips, the shoulders, the neck, and the head, right? We want this nice vertical alignment so we can engage multiple muscles, multiple joints at the same time. As I press out in front, the rotation, the band, the cable is trying to pull me out of position. I'm just using those muscles, again, with the right resistance, not cranking on too much, because then I start to really twist and cheat and compensate to hold my position there in a nice rigid way, right? So we're using these muscles to prevent rotation rather than create rotation. And then the next step, performing that same one in the half kneeling position. So you can see here, now we're connecting pieces together. We're not just training in isolation these muscles. We're going into a lunge position, which is more unstable throughout the hips. It makes us have to balance more. We need to engage the glutes. We need to engage the core. We need to engage these anti-rotators to hold the position. Good alignment at the legs, right? Getting a little bit more specific to running here. Like I mentioned, Palloff press variations, you don't see them a lot from many runners. I think if you started doing them in the gym, people be looking at you like, wow, I haven't seen that one before. But it's a great exercise that works on preventing rotation, because as we run, we want to, again, we don't want to be throwing around our body in rotation. We want some stiffness in there. So as we start to rotate, we tense up those muscles and we're efficient as we come back from side to side. So we're placing a little stretch on them. They're contracting and we're rotating side by side side to side. Okay. Because we want those muscles to transfer energy, lower extremity, upper extremity, and vice versa. Now, the bridging variations, most people are very well aware they should be doing bridging exercises. I like to put this in its own category and incorporate, again, a whole variation of bridges, starting with your standard hip bridge. One thing, if we go back to the setup for this exercise, this is where we still want to focus on breathing to a great degree, right? We want to set up, a lot of people I see as they lift the hips up, they're either arching into the lower back, they're feeling the lower back, feeling the hamstrings, not feeling the glutes. We want to set up on our back. We want to take a nice big exhale. Long exhale. Allow the rib cage to come down. As that rib cage comes down, it creates this canister, right? Pelvis, spine, rib cage stacked one on top of the other, okay, in a good position. Then I can drive up and get into the hips. I see a lot of people aren't setting up properly, getting up there just out of position enough that the hamstrings are working too hard or the lower back is working too hard. We want the glutes to be the primary kind of group of muscles, 3 muscles in the glutes there, but primary the glute maximus to get us up into extension, but we need position of the core to happen first so we can really access those muscles. This is training in our push off, right? Our strength from our posterior chain, how we push the ground away from us. That's our propulsion, that's our power. That's what helps translate to running speed and increasing our pace, is these bridging variations. So first step here is just getting that hip bridge. Exhale, rib cage down, hips all the way up into extension, nice straight line, knees, hips, shoulders, and maintain that at all times as I continue to breathe. I'm holding, I'm engaging the core, I'm engaging the glutes. I'm continuing to breathe and inhale, exhale, expanding around the body as best I can. And then next, once we get that down, going into a hip bridge with marching, right? We need to try to get to single leg variations with strength training as much as possible when it comes to improving running. So here, because, and very specific, as we push off one leg, the other leg is coming forward, getting ready to strike the ground. So this is a very specific movement pattern where we're engaging the glute, core muscles, staying up into extension as the other leg is going through a march, right? Marching is one of the best things, whether it's hip bridge or marching, just marching, skipping, those types of exercises and drills that relates to running. But you can see here, I want rib cage down. I want my hips all the way up into extension. So knees, hips, and shoulders in a straight line. And I want to make sure as I lift a leg, my hips aren't dropping and my pelvis isn't rotating. See a lot of people that are kind of dropping in their pelvis. Either hips are dropping overall or one side is twisting compared to the other side. We want stability. So it's almost like you're at the top of that hip bridge, nothing's changing. One leg is moving, but your position is so solid that you're not losing that in any way. Now, I talked in the end of that ebook, talked about how do we put things together in a way that really truly translates to running. One thing I've seen over the years, people do a really good job on ground-based core exercises, what I just demonstrated. How do we get on the ground and train the core in more of an isolated fashion, even though with these stabilization exercises, a lot of different muscles are working and firing at the same time. So a little bit more well-rounded than some of the strengthening exercises. But how do we get this to carry over to running in an upright and dynamic way, right? That's where running is, running, walking, most of these functional movements that we're doing. So we can't always assume that just because I'm training the core on the ground, that's going to make me a better runner in the end. I need to bridge that gap as much as possible, and that's where loaded carries come in. So you may have seen these exercises. They've grown in popularity over the years, but still rarely done compared to some of the traditional core strengthening exercises. All I would do here, I would try, again, start light, but really progress your weight as soon as you can. I'm trying to hold the heaviest resistance I can hold in my hand. Those dumbbells are going to provide a little bit of sway to the body side by side, side to side. And I'm just trying to exhale, rib cage down, cores engaged, good posture. I'm just walking nice and slowly down and back. I'm trying to prevent against the sway as I'm stepping and going through that gait pattern from one foot to the next, right? We're teaching these muscles how to fire to stabilize the spine as we perform some kind of, again, walking movement or marching movement, as you'll see here in a second. So it doesn't seem like a lot's going on here, but you'll be surprised, grabbing a heavy pair of dumbbells in your hand, walking slowly forward and backward, how much tension, how much tightness, how much activation you're feeling throughout the core. The pelvis has to continue to stabilize as you step from one to the next. The hip, the foot, the spine wants to tilt and sway side by side, and you're just locking yourself in a good position where you're not moving or losing that posture in any way, okay? Very simple in its design, pretty challenging once you add a heavy pair of dumbbells. Now, next up, this is where I get people as soon as possible. We want to, like I said, get onto a single leg. This kind of ties together core training, core stability training, and running form as well. because I like to layer in different pieces that people need to address based on their running analysis. If I know someone is overstriding, that foot is landing too far in front, as they go through this march, I'm teaching them how to strike straight down underneath the knee. If they're dropping the pelvis or their knee is collapsing in as they get into mid stance, I'm going to help them slowly transition from one foot to the next so that pelvis stays nice and level and they're focused on alignment of the leg. There's a lot of little pieces you can put together here with the 2 dumbbell marching variation. So making sure you're thinking about those key things rather than just grabbing a pair of dumbbells and going. You're thinking about breathing, stabilizing, posture, and then any little running form cues that you need to emphasize to improve your running. So let's take another quiz here as we start to wrap up. One last poll. See if we lost anyone. Let's see, let me switch this over to the second one. All right, so second poll, last one for today, and we'll kind of get into the raffle, to the take-home message in the raffle in a second. So question 1, in order to execute a proper core training program, you must learn how to stabilize and blank simultaneously. Is it breathe, talk, sing, or none of the above? The type of core training that builds gluteal and posterior chain strength stability is known as anti-extension, anti-rotation, hip bridging, or all the above. 3, loaded carries, which we just talked about, are a form of upright and dynamic core stabilization exercise, which you can probably see around the quiz here. Is that true or false? So take a second, answer those. Let's see how well we do. Waiting for one more. Awesome. All right, perfect. Need to stabilize and breathe simultaneously, so hopefully you think about that a little bit more. Hip. Oh, so number 2, sorry. Now, the type of core training that builds gluteal and posterior chain strength, that is the hip bridge specifically, not anti-rotation or anti-extension. Sorry, cat's jumping up here. You might see the tail come across. So it is hip bridging on that second one, not anti-extension or anti-rotation. And then, oh, sorry, let me share that with you guys. I didn't do that now that I'm seeing this. Okay, and then the third one is true. Loaded carries, upright and dynamic core stabilization. So remember, your bridging exercises, driving up the hips, engaging the glutes, hamstring, posterior chain, which is that back side of the body. That's the one you guys all said all the above on, which kind of tripped Jeff on that one. All right, so now take home message here. What you need to do, again, in a general sense, I recommend selecting an exercise from each category. If you know or see as you start to complete these exercises, again, hopefully you've been doing them and this is a refresher. If you haven't, add them in there and see how you feel. If you notice anything in particular is harder than the other, I would, again, first make sure form is good. Exercise might be hard just because your form isn't proper. Make sure form is good first, and then you can add extra of that exercise throughout the week. Okay, because we need to make sure we're building up our weaknesses, our weak links as much as possible. So don't just do everything to do everything, but see which one gets you trouble and prioritize that. Next, core training 2 to 3 times a week. Again, we're talking a handful of exercises here. Don't need to do every single one of them. Pick a handful of exercises, complete them multiple times throughout the week, add them into your strength training, add them, again, can't go wrong adding them before your run. Tightening up, again, getting in a better position so then you can run more effectively, or doing it as a cool down. You can do this stuff anywhere, right? It's so simple, low level. Again, some of these, the single leg side planks will be a little bit harder, but some of the other core exercises, I think they're really good preparatory exercises if you're going to do them before you're running as well. Be consistent. Most of these need to be done for a extended period of time. You'll feel better after a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. You'll start to see those neuromuscular improvements, right? Firing the right muscles, getting in the right position. But to truly build strength, stability, we need to do something for a minimum 4 to 6 weeks. Once you perfect it, then we progress to the next step. So if you're doing your side plank, work on that side plank 4 to 6 weeks. Start at 20 seconds, go to 30, 40, 50, 60. Once you get to 60 seconds, then we go to the modified one with the leg lift. Work on that 4 to 6 weeks. Build up from 8 reps to 10 reps, 12 to 15. Go to the full side plank, right? It's so simple. We complicate this a lot of times and overcomplicate it, where we do things so randomly. A lot of times when it comes to group classes or or boot camps, there's so much variety in there that we never truly get better at the basics. We need to really double down on doing these things over a consistent period of time, being consistent, being patient, and then progressing when you're proficient with the movement. Don't just progress to progress, because there's also that mindset of I want things to be as hard as possible. Some of these core stability exercises are very form, position, and alignment intensive. They're not going to feel as hard as doing a sit-up, doing a crunch, which is like, oh, wow, I feel my abs burning. Really focus on the basics of getting in the right position, breathing, mastering that movement, and then progress on and try to eliminate that whole, I want it to be hard just to be hard thing, okay? A lot of times that leaves people in a bad place where they're not necessarily better at some of these basic core stabilization exercises, and they just progress too quickly throughout their program. Now, so at this point, hopefully showed you how you can use core training, core stabilization specifically to improve your running, reduce the likelihood of injury, improve performance, right? It should tie into all of those things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up one more quiz, no big tough questions for you, but just simply state yes or no if you're interested in entering the raffle for 1 free month, the Healthy Running Program. So what this program includes, regardless of location, right? With technology and working with people all over the place. So it doesn't matter where you live, we're still going to figure out the running analysis piece. We're going to do a movement assessment, understand what you need, what are your goals, what are your needs from what we're seeing in the testing. And then based on what upcoming races, based on what you have coming up, or just goals in general, create you that specific program. This won't just be core training specifically. It can be if you want it to be, but we're going to look at what are your weak links throughout the body. Flexibility, mobility, range of motion, strength, stability, overall movement quality, and then put this into a very well-rounded program for you specifically. And we'll just have the opportunity to work together for a month period of time within this trial program. But I'm going to I'm going to post the poll one more time. If you're interested in entering the raffle for 1 free month, yes or no? Gonna wait till a few people post in here. Let's see, got one more. Perfect, awesome. All right, everyone's entered. Let's end that poll. Okay, so if by chance, everyone can't win the raffle. If by chance you do not win the raffle for 1 free month, the Healthy Running Program, willing to help you in any way, I need to help you. I want you to understand that core training obviously is one piece to this. We have, again, lower body training, upper body training. We have running form, running mechanics, those injury reduction techniques. How do we improve your weak links in the process? This is one small piece to the bigger puzzle. So what I always offer people after these webinars is let's find a time to connect. And that way I can understand exactly what your goals are, what your needs, to then hopefully provide a little bit more guidance in a more well-rounded way. So we're not just implementing a core training program, but missing other things in the process. How do we tie everything together in a way that's going to improve your running? So you should see a couple minutes ago, I just shot you a text as well, 12:50. And here's a link. Take a second right now as we start to wrap up, schedule your customization call. This is going to be a 30-minute consultation. And not saying you need to work with me in any way. Again, very specific on the people that I work with and take on as clients. I just want to help you as best as possible. So if there's some guidance or some advice I can provide you once I understand, if we can jump on a call and we can test a couple things, see what we're looking at. If you're someone that wants to work together, we can talk about that. But if you just want some advice to how to put this together to better achieve your goals, let me know. And I'm definitely willing to help you in any way that I need to. So hopefully you just received that link through there. Probably got it through your phone and the text, and then in the webinar right now. Now, I just want to say thank you. I know a question just came through. I'll look at that in 1 second. I just want to say thank you guys for attending the webinar today. Hope it helped you in some way. I will be today at 4 o'clock sending the webinar replay and the winner of the raffle. I'll pick that person here in the next few minutes once you wrap up. So make sure you're checking your email, check your spam folder, your promotions folder, just in case it ends up in there. I don't want you to miss that. Feel free to send out the webinar. If you know someone else that needs that information, feel free to share it. Don't need to hold on to it or keep it secret or anything like that. Schedule your customization call. Definitely recommend that rather than just focusing on core training and implementing these. Let's figure out how all of this fits together in a well-rounded plan that will impact your running, general health, fitness, longevity for years to come. And then lastly, like I said, look in your spam folder because it would sometimes ends up in there. All right, so let's answer questions. If you have any questions specifically, All right, Katina, I apologize. Never got my ebook. I've checked all my folders. And I can't find it. So I'll send that to you again for sure. And the emails coming from my MailChimp, my newsletter software, you'll be surprised. The amount of, about, I think 25 or 30% of people, either they didn't open it or they didn't receive it because it went to spam or didn't go through in some way. So it's crazy how many of those are getting cut off. But I'm going to write a note down and I'll send that to you immediately once I wrap up here, so you have that. Any other questions? I had a question in here that I wrote down from the sign up. So core stability as it relates to pain. Missy asked, will core stability help with hip pain? It depends, right? It really depends on what the cause of that hip pain is. Biggest thing with the core, I think a lot of people need to emphasize that side plank progression. It really helps stabilize the pelvis, strengthen the obliques, muscles of the lower back, the hip abductors and glute, because that's what stabilizes the pelvis. So many people are landing as they strike the ground, their opposite side pelvis is dropping. From a stability standpoint, we want to try to maintain somewhere close to level. We're going to drop to a degree, but we don't want to drop excessively. That's one of the most important things that I implement in my strength training program. So it's core stabilization, yes, but it's also the lower body movements that tie into that. It's teaching proper form on step ups for lunges, all of those exercises, not just doing the exercise to do it, but again, setting up the core properly, setting up the pelvis properly. So as I move through the range of motion, I am stable, I am locked in a good position, so I'm not falling apart. That's one big area I see a lot of people who are struggling with hip pain, again, are a little bit more deficient at or in, but there's a lot of other things that could potentially be a cause there. Katina. Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you joining us today. Yeah, these little things, some of these exercises are pretty simple. We just need to take our time, perfect the basics, get better at them. It's not, I had someone comment the other day and say, I didn't learn anything new from the ebook. That's good, right? We need to stay away from a lot of these these exercises that are there just to grab our attention, because it's these basics that create the good foundation to improve our running. And these exercises aren't just running based, in my opinion. They help running, but for you, again, whether you're trying to chase around your kids or we're all getting older, we want to prevent falls, right? And be active as we get older. These are the things in exercise that really tie into that. So that's it for today. If there's any more questions, I'm going to keep this running for one more minute, see if we get a final question. But I appreciate you guys. Thanks for joining me here on this Sunday. Hope you guys we have a beautiful day over here in Michigan, cold, warming up, but nice and sunny. So I'm going to try to get out here in a few minutes and enjoy that. But I just want to say thank you for joining the webinar. I'll send you the replay, the raffle winner, later this afternoon. And if you have any questions at all, schedule that customization call, email me, let me know what questions you have, and let's really figure out a way to help you get on track, stay on track, and to see the best results possible. So thank you again, everyone. I hope you have a great Sunday, and look out for that email from me soon. And I look forward to connecting with some of you in the next few weeks or so. Have a good one.